Number 10. Get rattled. Snake infestations are fairly common in many rural parts of California, but in October 2021, a Santa Rosa woman found an entire den of slimy reptiles right underneath her feet. Al Wolf, the director of the Sonoma County Reptile Rescue Company, was called to save some snakes someone had found in their home. Pretty normal, right? Well, what looked like an ordinary day at the office turned out to be the craziest day of Wolf's life. He cracked into one of the floors to find the source of the snakes, and behold, there it was, a full-sized rattlesnake. But then he stumbled across a second, then a third, before he realized that this was a massive den full of Pacific rattlesnakes and their babies. Now, if you don't know, these are some of the deadliest snakes in Northern California and can get incredibly loud with their rattling, so no wonder the person living above was so annoyed. It took almost full hours to clean out the ones that weren't hiding, and in total, he managed to find 59 babies and 22 adult rattlesnakes. What's more, he had to make 2 trips just to make sure he hadn't left any behind. Oh, and guess what? He caught 11 more snakes during those trips. Of course, this attracted a bunch of media attention, so after he finished the job, Wolf explained just how bizarre it was to find almost 100 venomous snakes in one place. And according to him, over his 32-year-long career, this is the most he's ever caught. Number 9. Don't let the bedbugs bite. There aren't many things in life more disgusting than a bedbug infestation. In 2016, though, an outbreak in Augusta, Maine got so bad that city officials had to propose an emergency response. It happened in a dingy apartment building where the mattresses were getting very uncomfortable. Tenants would wake up with scabs and bruises all over their bodies, which they soon realized were caused by bed bugs. But this wasn't something contained in a single room. In fact, almost the entire building had been infested. One tenant was bitten so many times that he had to be sent to the hospital for treatment. Usually bed bugs aren't very mobile and don't spread across an entire building like this, so either these ones were so hyped on steroids or the apartments were just a cesspool of disease. Seriously though, when the code enforcement officer from the city investigated, he realized that the insects were in the walls, floors, and bathrooms. They were everywhere. Also, every single room had dozens of bedbug skeletons hanging around as they'd been shed and left behind. Yeah, the situation was ugly, so much so that the city task force had to team up with professionals to call in bug-killing avengers. That being said, it wasn't a walk in the park. They had to spray down every single inch of the building with chemicals, and once all the mayhem was over, city officials proposed an emergency ordinance which basically held the landlord responsible for making sure this didn't happen again. Number 8. A plague tale. Rat infestations are always the worst, not because they can bite you, but because of their tendency to attract other diseases. This case in particular, though, is definitely the weirdest we've ever seen, since it originated from a Florida woman's 3 pet rats. 29-year-old nurse Florine Brown was living in her grandfather's house in St. Petersburg and kept some pet rats. It was fairly harmless. She never had more than 2 or 3 at a time, but it all went spiraling down when a 4th male rat came into the mix and started breeding. Of course, she didn't mean for this to happen, but as someone who loved rats, she let it slide. She just liked taking care of the animals in general. It helped her move on and deal with the grief after her grandpa's death. Rodents don't exactly understand the concept of restraint, so if you don't stop them, they're going to continue to breed and multiply. Before she knew it, their population had grown exponentially, and Florine had almost 500 rats inside her home. In the kitchen, inside the couch, under the stairs, the bathroom, every single crevice was full of rodents, but she didn't seem to be bothered. In fact, she just wanted to find a good home for them. That being said, she couldn't keep them there either, though. Being surrounded by 500 rats isn't exactly healthy, and they were chewing their way out of cages. Oh, and apparently even pest control experts told her she was literally living in a toxic environment. Eventually, her sister, who was absolutely disgusted, ratted her out to the SPCA, who came and started a long, drawn-out process of cleaning the place up. Number 7. Lord of the Roaches. They say cockroaches can survive a nuclear apocalypse, which is both fascinating and terrifying. 2 elderly men from Pennsylvania, though, took that information to heart. They thought being covered in roaches would protect them. In February 2012, local authorities in Jeannette were warned about an infestation in a home on Columbia Avenue. When they came to investigate, they instead discovered a scene straight out of a horror movie. The house, which had already been evacuated, had thousands of cockroaches crawling around inside. In fact, the situation was so bad that you'd struggle to see any part of the walls, floor, or ceiling that didn't have some kind of bug on it. But when police asked 52-year-old Daryl Bearden about the situation, he said everything in his house was perfectly fine. He lived with his 8-year-old best friend Bob, who didn't object to the conditions either, and according to them, it was a mutually beneficial friendship since they took care of each other. Of course, they were aware of the roaches crawling all over them, but apparently didn't think much of it. Why? Well, because roaches don't bite. That being said, the city council intervened and forced them out of the home. Bearden was taken to a shelter while Bob was put into a hospital. The landlord didn't get off scot-free either, and an investigation was launched against him. Number 6. Honey, I'm home. Everyone's had to deal with a bee's nest at some point in their lives, but one Canadian family got the shock of their lives when they found something truly terrifying. Loretta Yates from Ontario was making some food in her kitchen when she felt something dripping from a crack in the ceiling. Her family had seen plenty of bees flying around the house and trying to get in, but thought nothing of it since that's just what bees do. Cracks oozing with liquid, though? That was a major red flag. The kitchen wasn't the only room with this problem either. Apparently, cracks were showing up all over the house. In fact, at one point, a light bulb in the house blew up after filling up with the oozing liquid. The liquid, of course, was honey, produced by a few bee colonies nestled in the first floor ceiling. Then again, it wasn't just any old colony. There were almost 80,000 bees living in the home. And the space was so packed that other bees had to leave to get breathing room, which explains the insects trying to get back in through the kitchen door. Loretta called some beekeepers who had to take down the ceilings to scrape almost 220 pounds, or just shy of 100 kilograms of honeycombs out, which in and of itself took 6 hours. The total cost was about $15,000. But the most impressive part of this whole situation? Not a single bee ever stung the couple. Would you stay in the house after this, or would you move away? Tell us in the comments below and hit that subscribe button while you're at it. Number 5. Tangled web. If you asked 50 random people on the street what they were afraid of, a lot of them would probably say spiders. After all, their long, spindly legs and venomous bites are pretty scary. But you know what's worse than one spider? Thousands of them in your own house. One St. Louis family who just moved into their new home quickly found out that they were actually living in a house of horrors. Everywhere they looked, there were spiders. In the fireplace, the walls, behind the curtains, and even in the showers. In total, there were about 6,000 just scuttering about. To make things worse, they weren't just friendly neighborhood spiders that eat bugs. Instead, these were brown recluses whose venom can actually kill a person. If you've ever had to face one of these bad boys, then you know they don't die easily either. Oh, and we're not talking about stomping them with their shoe, since apparently even trained professionals have trouble dealing with an infestation. In fact, these spiders were so resistant to pest control treatment that the family had to move out and file an insurance claim and even a lawsuit against the previous owner. Number 4. Food for ants. In March 2013, an elderly Florida woman visited a hospital with some of the worst rashes doctors had ever seen. Her entire body was covered in red bumps. When things didn't get better after a month or so of allergy treatments, she called an exterminator to take a look at her 3-story condo. Since she was nearly blind, she thought maybe she'd been bitten by bed bugs or something else. After all, that's usually what these sorts of rashes come from. The exterminator McChesney, however, discovered something unprecedented. She didn't have bedbugs in her home at all. Instead, it was something way worse: fire ants. Now, these guys can be pretty nasty, but they don't usually nestle inside homes. This colony, though, was embedded right into the woman's bed, with ants traveling back and forth to the main super colony on the roof. The ants were actually eating her skin as she slept through the night. Hold on a second though, aren't fire ant bites supposed to sting? Well, yes, but since she was on some very strong pain meds, she didn't feel anything. Besides, without her eyesight, she couldn't really tell she was being eaten alive either. Thankfully, the crew was able to clean everything up before she was turned into a skinless ghost. Number 3. A Bug's Life. What happens when you get some roaches and bedbugs and make them fight each other? Well, food chain hell, that's what. In August 2012, one of the worst bug nightmares imaginable unfolded at a senior living community in San Diego. People living there were constantly being sent to the hospital for all kinds of bites and rashes. So when a pest control company came to take a look, they found something they'd never seen before. From the front door all the way to the beds, there were blood spots everywhere. And it wasn't subtle either. Of course, that's what bedbugs do, so they thought they could deal with them. What they didn't realize, though, that there was another rival at play here. Yup, there was an infestation of German cockroaches in the community as well, and the two insects were not living in harmony. It was pretty fascinating though, since the bedbugs were feasting on the old people in their sleep, while the roaches were munching on the bugs after they finished, so it was like a bizarre and disgusting food chain. That being said, dealing with them wasn't exactly a simple task. In the end, it took almost 2 weeks for the extermination crew to clear out the place. Number 2, the bat signal. If you ever thought living in your own bat cave would be cool, then let us tell you, it's not. One Canadian family had a pretty similar experience. Matthew Dewan and Katrina Archand had just moved into a 150-year-old farmhouse in Kemptville, Ontario. Since they got it for a cheap price, they knew it would be a major fixer-upper. What they didn't know, though, was that the house had also had a massive bat problem. Only a few months in, they started to notice random bat droppings dripping through the ceilings and into their children's bedroom. Things really escalated the next summer, though, when the entire house started smelling like a filthy hamster cage. They thought it was probably just a bunch of dead mice somewhere, but then the true horror revealed itself when they spotted some massive flying bats coming from the home. Apparently, these things were so big that they almost looked like tiny pterodactyls. The family sent out the bat signal and called a specialist, who, upon inspection, found hundreds of bats in the attic. The worst part was all the gooey guano buildup, which in some places was almost 2 feet or just about 0.6 meters tall. But all's well that ends well, since the family's insurance company had to pay for the house to be knocked down and rebuilt entirely. Number 1, Squirrel Nightmare. What do you get when you build a house directly under a giant acorn tree? Well, probably a bunch of squirrels. That's exactly what happened in 2004 when an exterminator named Bill Earl was called to sort out what we can only describe as the complete nightmare. When he got to the job, he realized the house was basically squirrel heaven. Not only was it built right under a massive acorn tree, but it also had plenty of forest surrounding it. And to make matters worse, even the tiles were terracotta, which is notoriously easy for little critters to tear through. Don't even get us started on the interior. The walls were stained with rodent pee, and all of the wiring had been chewed to pieces. The worst part? These freeloading squirrels were aggressive and didn't want to be evicted, so much so that no one had been able to deal with them for nearly 35 years. If you closed up an entry point, they'd tear open another one. If you tried to get close to them, an army would descend upon you. So it took a lot of clever planning, a giant strobe light called a squirrel evictor, and a strengthening of the walls to finally drive them all away. Thanks for watching. Would you rather have a bunch of spiders in your attic or rats in your basement? Tell us in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you next time on The Bad Badger.